Lisette's life had been filled with hope and dreams for the future. But everything changed the day her husband, Dash, left her for another woman. The pain of betrayal cut deep, and Lisette was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart. But through her struggles, she found strength she never knew she had. Slowly, she rebuilt her life, one step at a time, with the help of an old friend, Luke. Their bond grew stronger, and together they created a new beginning filled with love, hope, and success. Just when everything seemed to be going right, Dash returned, not to make amends but to humiliate her. What he didn't expect, however, was to be shocked by the woman Lisette had become, a woman stronger, wiser, and far more resilient than he could have ever imagined. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell to avoid missing any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. A selfish and heartless husband, consumed by his desires, decided one day to sell his half of the house, the very home he had built with his wife, and disappeared with his mistress. Abandoning the life they had once shared, he left without warning, without explanation, leaving behind broken promises and shattered dreams. But when he eventually returned, filled with arrogance and a sickening hunger for revenge, ready to humiliate the woman he once called his wife, he was met with a sight that knocked the wind out of his chest. Lisette was not the fragile woman he had expected to find. Instead, what stood before him was a woman transformed, radiant with a strength and resilience that he had never believed she possessed. It all began that morning, a morning unlike any other, when Lisette woke early, a heavy unease settling deep in her chest, gnawing at her insides. She could feel something was off, something darker and more menacing than the usual loneliness that had become her constant companion. Dash's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold, a cruel reminder that his presence in her life had become more of a phantom than a reality. For months he had been pulling away, his absences more frequent, his excuses for late nights at work flimsy and hollow. Lisette had tried to believe him, to convince herself that this was just a phase, that their love would weather this storm. But deep down, she knew the truth. The love she had once felt so deeply for him had withered, starved by neglect and betrayal. As she moved sluggishly through the house that morning, preparing breakfast, she couldn't shake the weight that pressed down on her. Every room echoed with silence, a silence that had once been comforting, now suffocating. Her thoughts swirled, fixating on the conversation she had been rehearsing in her mind for days, a conversation she had dreaded but knew was inevitable. They had been saving for an apartment together, something that symbolized the future they had promised each other. It was supposed to be a place where they would build their family, a sanctuary from the outside world. But now, the apartment had become something else entirely, a symbol of their fractured relationship, a battleground over ownership and control. Lisette had decided she would no longer be silent, no longer allow herself to be pushed aside. They had both contributed equally to their savings, both sacrificed to make their shared dreams a reality, and yet Dash treated it as though it was solely his. That morning, she resolved to demand that the apartment be registered in both their names. It was only fair. After all, they had built this life together, hadn't they? But there was a tightening in her stomach, a growing sense of dread, knowing Dash wouldn't take kindly to her demand. He wasn't the type to share power easily, especially not with his wife. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Just as she was setting the coffee down, Dash entered the kitchen. The air seemed to thicken with tension as he walked in, his steps heavy, his presence cold. He didn't look at her. His face, which once held warmth and familiarity, now seemed hardened, distant, as though the man she had married no longer existed. He avoided her gaze, and that avoidance cut deeper than any words he could have spoken. It was as if he couldn't bear to face the person he had become or the damage he had caused. Dash, Lisette began, her voice betraying the tightness in her throat. "We need to talk." He stopped abruptly, staring down at the cup of coffee she had placed before him, as if it held some secret that could speak him from this moment. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the gravity of her words. About what, he asked flatly, his tone dismissive, as though whatever she had to say was insignificant. "About the apartment," Lisette replied, her heart pounding louder now. She could feel the moment stretching out, the weight of her words hanging between them. "I think it's only right that it's registered in both of our names. We've both put in the money. We've both contributed." For the first time, Dash lifted his gaze to meet hers. His face was a mask of irritation, barely concealing his anger. His eyes, once so familiar, now looked at her with a coldness that sent shivers down her spine. "I don't see why you're making this an issue," Lisette snapped. his words dripping with condescension. "We're a family. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Isn't that enough for you?" Lisette felt a surge of frustration rising within her, a frustration born from years of being silenced, of being told that her feelings didn't matter, that her needs were secondary. But this time she wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let his words wash over her like they always had. She wasn't going to let him win. "It's not enough," she said, her voice firmer now, her resolve hardening. "We've both worked for this. We've both sacrificed, and it's only fair that it reflects both our efforts. I'm not asking for anything more than what's right." Dash's frown deepened, his irritation turning to anger. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by her. For years he had relied on her silence, on her compliance to keep things the way he wanted them. But now she was standing up to him, and it infuriated him. "Traditionally, the man owns the home," he spat, his voice tinged with a bitterness that surprised even him. "There's no reason to complicate things with paperwork. Why are you making this into a fight?" Lisette's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the anger that had been building inside her for so long. She had let him control the narrative for years, had let him dictate what was right and wrong based on his outdated beliefs. But she was done. She was done living under the weight of his expectations, done letting him decide her worth. "I'm not making this into a fight," she said calmly, though the fire in her eyes betrayed the storm raging within. "I'm simply standing up for what's fair. I'm standing up for myself." For a moment, stared at her, shocked by the strength in her voice, by the defiance in her gaze. This wasn't the Lisette he knew, the woman who had always been so eager to please, so willing to bend to his will. This was someone new, someone who had found her voice, and he didn't like it. Without another word, turned on his heel and stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Lisette standing there, her heart racing but her spirit unbroken. She knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of power, a sense of control over her own life. Little did know that his actions would soon lead him down a path of regret, one that would eventually bring him back to the doorstep of the woman he had once scorned. And when he returned, ready to belittle and humiliate her once more, he would be the one left humiliated. Because Lisette would no longer be the woman he had left behind. She would be stronger, braver, and more determined than ever before, a woman reborn from the ashes of his betrayal. "We live in a modern era of equal rights. If it doesn't matter to you, then it should be registered in both of our names," Lisette said, her voice steady, but tinged with a quiet challenge. She could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air between them, knowing that this was more than just about the apartment, it was about her standing up for herself. "Or is there something else you don't want me to know?" For a moment, was speechless. His irritation flickered into something closer to shock, surprise twisting his features as if he didn't quite recognize the woman standing in front of him. He hadn't anticipated this kind of defiance from Lisette, the quiet woman who had always gone along with whatever he decided. But here she was, asserting herself in a way that threw him off balance, and it was clear from his expression that he didn't know how to handle it. After a long pause, he finally responded, though his words were measured, his tone cold. "The additional costs of registering the property in both of our names are unnecessary," he said, his voice tight, as though grasping for a reasonable argument that might sway her. "We don't need to complicate things. What's mine is yours already." Lisette met his gaze head on, the conviction in her eyes unmistakable. She could feel that this was a pivotal moment, a crossroads in their marriage where her future self would either be silent or finally heard. "We can cut other expenses to make up for it," she replied, her voice calm but unwavering. "Like your beer consumption, for example." Blinked, momentarily stunned into silence. His lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. He was taken aback not only by her suggestion but by the firmness with which she had delivered it. This wasn't the compliant wife he had grown comfortable controlling. This was someone who had found her strength, and it unsettled him deeply. He wasn't sure what to do with this new version of Lisette, who no longer seemed willing to accept his dominance without question. "I don't understand why you're suddenly acting this way," Lisette finally said, his voice softer now but laden with frustration and disbelief. His eyes searched hers for some hint of the woman he had been used to, the one who would bend but not break. "What's gotten into you?" Lisette took a deep breath, feeling a mix of fear and empowerment swirling inside her. It would have been easier to back down, to let the conversation drop, and return to the familiar rhythm of their relationship, but she couldn't do that anymore. "I'm tired, she said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't have a voice in our decisions. It's time for things to change." Stared at her, his expression a tangled mix of confusion, anger, and something that almost resembled hurt. He looked as though he wanted to argue, to assert his control over the situation, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the realization that things had already shifted, that Lisette wasn't going to be silenced this time. Whatever it was, he stood there for a moment, opening and closing his mouth as if struggling to find the right words before muttering something about discussing it later. Without another word, he turned and left the kitchen, leaving Lisette alone with her thoughts. That night, as she prepared for bed, Lisette found herself reflecting on the conversation. She knew this was just the beginning of a difficult and uncertain road, one fraught with challenges and likely more confrontations. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a renewed sense of strength and determination. The fear that had once paralyzed her was now fading, replaced by a quiet but growing belief in herself. As she lay down, she felt a strange, unexpected calm settle over her. She had taken a crucial step toward asserting her place in her own life, toward demanding the respect and equality she deserved. And that realization, that newfound courage, gave her the strength to face whatever might come next. On the other hand, slept fitfully. His dreams were restless, haunted by the events of the night and the feeling that the control he had taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. He tossed and turned, unable to shake the unsettling thought that something had shifted between them in a way he couldn't easily fix. The next morning, Lisette awoke still feeling the weight of the previous night's conversation pressing on her mind. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She needed to talk to someone, to process everything that had happened. Without hesitation, she picked up her phone and dialed Sully, her closest friend and a constant source of wisdom and support. After a few exchanges, they arranged to meet at a nearby cafe later that day. As Lisette walked to the cafe, anxiety churned in her stomach. How would she even begin to explain the storm that had been brewing in her life? When she arrived, Sully was already seated at a cozy corner table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up and smiled warmly when she saw Lisette approaching. "Lisette," Sully exclaimed, standing up to embrace her. "It's so good to see you. You look like you've got something heavy on your mind." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Lisette returned the hug, feeling a small wave of relief wash over her as she sat down. The tension that had gripped her all morning began to loosen, if only slightly. "There's so much to tell," she sighed, reaching for her cup of coffee. "And I, we had a big argument last night. Things are getting worse." Sully's smile faded as she listened, her brow furrowing with concern. She didn't interrupt, allowing Lisette the space to pour out everything that had been weighing her down. The growing distance between her and the fight about the apartment, the way she had finally stood up for herself. As the words spilled out, Lisette felt a strange sense of relief, as though simply speaking her truth aloud was giving her the strength to move forward. When she had finished, Sully reached across the table and took Lisette's hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "Lisette, what you're doing is incredibly important," Sully said, her voice firm but filled with compassion. "You've been silenced for too long. Doesn't get to control everything. And you don't have to accept being treated like you don't matter. You deserve respect, and you deserve to be an equal partner in this marriage." Lisette nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude toward her friend. "I know you're right, Sully," she said, her voice soft. "But it's hard. It's hard to stand my ground when he's always been so dominant, and I've always been so compliant." Sully gave her a reassuring smile, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's not going to be easy, but you've already taken the first step. And that's the hardest part. You're finding your voice and you're learning to trust your instincts. Don't let him take that away from you." Lisette felt a flicker of hope reignite inside her. She was on a new path now, one filled with uncertainty and challenges. But she wasn't walking it alone. With friends like Sully by her side and a newfound belief in her worth, she knew she could face whatever came next. As she left the cafe that day, Lisette walked with her head held high, ready to fight for the respect and equality she had always deserved. "You have to be strong, Lisette. You have to remember your worth and never let anyone, not even make you feel less. You deserve to have a voice in your own decisions. It's time to stop being treated like a doormat." Sully's words rang in Lisette's ears, resonating deep in her heart. Lisette knew her friend was right. For far too long, she had allowed Dash to make all the decisions, to silence her desires and needs. But now, something inside her had shifted. There was a fire, a determination to reclaim her power and identity. She had been living in the shadows of someone else's ambitions, sacrificing her dreams to support a man who barely saw her anymore. "You're right," Sully Lisette said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "I can't keep going like this. I need to make changes. I need to stop letting Dash manipulate me and make me feel small." Sully smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride. "Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. I'm here, right by your side, every step of the way." Those words gave Lisette the strength she needed. The rest of the afternoon was spent talking about lighter things, old memories, shared laughs, but beneath it all, Lisette felt something had shifted. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she felt hopeful, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't going to be a passive observer in her own life anymore. That evening, as she prepared for bed, a calm settled over her. It was a calm she hadn't felt in years, a calm that came with the knowledge that she had faced one of the most difficult moments in her life and had come out stronger. The sale of the apartment was progressing, and the idea of starting over without Dash's shadow looming over her filled her with hope. There were still challenges ahead, she knew that, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face them. She was determined to find the happiness and peace she had been denied for so long. The sale of the apartment moved forward smoothly, and with each passing day, Lisette felt lighter, closer to freeing herself from the lingering pain of her failed marriage. Though the sting of Dash's betrayal still haunted her, the thought of a fresh start was enough to keep her going. One morning, while going over some final details with the real estate agent, her phone rang. "Lisette, it's Luke. Can we meet to discuss the apartment purchase?" Luke's voice had a warmth she hadn't heard in a long time, and it immediately brought back memories of simpler times. He was someone she had known in her youth, a friend who had always been kind and supportive. Without hesitation, she agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe later that afternoon. When she arrived there, he was Luke, standing by the window, his smile as welcoming as ever. As she walked in, the tension in her chest eased, and for the first time in a while, she felt at ease. "Lisette, it's great to see you," Luke said, rising to greet her with a warm hug. "It's been so long." "Likewise, Luke. I never imagined life would bring us together like this," she replied, feeling a strange sense of comfort in his presence. They sat down, initially discussing the apartment details, but soon the conversation drifted into memories of their past, of school, of old friends, and of the paths their lives had taken. Luke spoke of his travels, his career, and how he had returned to their hometown to settle down. Lisette, in turn, shared the recent struggle she had been through, though she carefully avoided delving too deeply into the pain Dash had caused. "It sounds like you've been through a lot," Luke said, his voice gentle with understanding. "But it's clear you're finding your way again. I'm proud of you, Lisette. It takes a lot of courage to rebuild." "It hasn't been easy," Lisette admitted, "but I'm determined to start over. I can't keep living in the past." As the sale progressed, something unexpected happened. Luke, now the owner of the apartment, offered to let Lisette stay in the half that had belonged to Dash until she could find a place of her own. Surprised and deeply touched by his generosity, she grasped it. It was a gesture that went beyond kindness. It was an opportunity to rebuild her life without the immediate pressure of finding new housing. With Luke's support, Lisette found herself slowly regaining her footing. She realized that more than a change of scenery, she needed a change of perspective, a new direction for her life. She decided to return to her studies, enrolling in a business administration course she had abandoned years ago to support Dash's career. Each day, Lisette awoke with renewed purpose. In the mornings, she attended her classes, and in the afternoons, she worked on personal projects she had long neglected. Luke, living just across the hall, became a constant source of encouragement. His presence was a steady reminder that life could move forward, that even after betrayal, kindness and connection were still possible. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of studies, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Luke standing there, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Care for a break?" he asked with a grin. Lisette smiled, grateful for the company. They spent the evening talking and laughing like they had in their youth. As the night wore on, Lisette realized just how much her life had changed. The void Dash had left was no longer a source of pain. It had been filled by her strength and by the kindness of someone who saw her for who she truly was. "Thank you," Lisette said quietly as the evening drew to a close. "I don't know how I would have gotten through all of this without you." Luke looked at her with deep sincerity, his voice soft but full of conviction. "You don't have to thank me, Lisette. I'm here because I want to be. You deserve so much more than what you've been through, and I'll be here to help you find it." That night, Lisette went to bed feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she felt confident that she could face whatever came her way. With Luke's unwavering support and the strength she had discovered within herself, Lisette was ready to embrace her new life. The days turned into weeks, and the transition to this new chapter became more real with each passing day. The sale of the apartment was finalized, and Lisette felt a sense of closure. The tension that had once filled her home was replaced by an atmosphere of calm and mutual respect. One morning, as she made coffee, there was a knock on her door. It was Luke, standing with a folder of papers in hand. "Good morning, Lisette. I thought we could go over some of the final documents for the apartment. Is that all right?" Lisette nodded, inviting him in. As they sat at the kitchen table, they talked not only of the apartment, but of their dreams for the future. "I've always wanted a place that felt like home," Luke said, glancing around the apartment. "This is perfect, and I'm glad you're here too. How are your studies going?" "They're going well," Lisette replied, smiling. "It's been a challenge, but I'm learning so much. It feels good to be moving forward." And for the first time in a long time, Lisette truly believed it. She was moving forward one step at a time, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Weeks gradually turned into months, and the bond between Lisette and Luke blossomed into something deeper than either of them had expected. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing dinners, talking about their day's highs and lows, and taking quiet evening walks around the neighborhood. With each passing day, Lisette realized that her feelings for Luke went far beyond friendship. There was a new warmth between them, a gentle familiarity that brought her more peace than she had known in years. One Friday night, after a long week of classes and work, Luke suggested they go out for dinner. He had picked a small Italian restaurant at the corner of their neighborhood, a cozy place with warm lighting and soft, romantic music in the background. "This place is lovely," Lisette remarked as they sat down. She admired the intimate ambience, appreciating how the moment felt special. "Thank you for bringing me here." "It's my pleasure, Lisette. I wanted to do something special for you," Luke said with a smile, his gaze lingering on her just long enough to make Lisette's heart flutter. Throughout dinner, their conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from lighthearted topics to deeper reflections about their hopes and fears. They spoke of their dreams for the future, of the lives they wanted to lead. Luke's attentiveness captivated Lisette. He listened to her as though her every word mattered. She hadn't felt this cherished in years. "You're an amazing woman," Luke said earnestly, his voice soft but full of conviction. "Everything you've been through, the way you've rebuilt yourself, it's truly admirable." Lisette felt her chest warm, not just with gratitude, but with something deeper, something that had been slowly growing between them. "Thank you, Luke. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've been my rock through all of this." After dinner, they walked home under the soft glow of the moonlight. The streets were quiet, the air cool and crisp. Without a word, Luke gently reached for Lisette's hand, and to her surprise, she didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, and it felt right. There was something magical about that moment, something that felt like a silent promise, a promise of hope, of healing, of love. When they reached her apartment door, Luke hesitated for a moment before turning to her. His expression was serious, but there was a tenderness in his eyes that made Lisette's heart race. "Lisette, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice laced with sincerity. "I've loved you since we were young. Those feelings never went away, and these past few months with you have only made them stronger. I want you to know that I'm here for you not just as a friend, but as someone who loves you deeply." Lisette's eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed by the depth of Luke's words. His confession was a balm for her soul, soothing the wounds of her past. She had spent so long feeling unloved and unseen, but now standing in front of Luke, she felt whole. "Luke, I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've felt something special between us too. You've brought so much light into my life. I think I've started to love you too." Luke's face lit up with a soft, radiant smile. Slowly, he leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a tender kiss, full of promises unspoken but deeply felt. At that moment, Lisette knew she had found a new beginning, a future filled with love, trust, and possibility. As time passed, Lisette and Luke's relationship flourished. Together, they opened a small coffee and letters shop, a cozy little corner of the world where customers came for both warmth and inspiration. Their love grew stronger every day, as did their shared dreams. Life had given Lisette a second chance at happiness, and she embraced it fully. However, Lisette hadn't completely forgotten about Dash. Through mutual friends, she learned that he had been struggling in the aftermath of their separation. He was trying to change, to become a better man, but his journey was a difficult one. One afternoon, while Lisette was organizing books in the shop, she looked up to find Dash standing in the doorway. He looked different, humbled, as if the weight of his mistakes had finally caught up to him. "Lisette," he said quietly, his voice trembling with emotion, "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I needed to talk to you." Lisette felt a mix of surprise and apprehension. She hadn't expected to see him again, much less hear what he had to say. "What do you need?" Dash, she asked, keeping her tone neutral. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Dash sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of guilt. "I've made so many mistakes, Lisa. I did things that I can never undo, and I'm working to change. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you. You didn't deserve any of it." For a moment, Lisette stood in silence, her emotions swirling. The pain of his betrayal still lingered, but she also recognized the courage it took for him to stand before her and admit his wrongs. It was the closure she had unknowingly been waiting for. "I appreciate you coming here to tell me this," Dash, she replied softly. "I know it hasn't been easy for either of us. I hope you find the peace you're looking for." Dash nodded. Gratitude was evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Lisette. I wish you all the best in your new life. You deserve happiness." As Dash turned to leave, Lisette felt a sense of closure and release wash over her. She hadn't expected to forgive him, but at that moment she realized that forgiveness wasn't for Dash, it was for her. It was the final piece she needed to let go of the past and move forward. With Luke by her side and a future full of love and possibility, Lisette knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her journey had been painful and difficult, but it had led her to a place of peace, strength, and love that was truly hers to cherish. That night, as Lisette shared a quiet dinner with Luke, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From the ashes of a broken marriage and a life of uncertainty, she had rebuilt herself, finding strength, purpose, and love. The hardships she had endured seemed distant now, as if each step, no matter how painful, had led her exactly to where she needed to be. With the past finally behind her, Lisette embraced the present and focused on the future. The coffee and letters shop, once just an idea, had flourished into a vibrant hub for the community. It wasn't just a business, it had become a place where people gathered, found comfort, and shared stories over cups of coffee and good books. The cozy atmosphere made the shop a refuge from the outside world, and Lisette took great pride in knowing she had created something that brought joy to others. One afternoon, while organizing bookshelves, Lisette received a call that took her completely by surprise. It was from the university she had attended years ago before life had forced her to put her studies on hold. The administrator on the other end of the line informed her that she had been selected for a scholarship and award based on her previous academic achievements and her ongoing dedication to personal and professional growth. Lisette was overwhelmed with emotion. She had dreamed of finishing her degree in business administration for years, but circumstances had always seemed to get in the way. Now, after all this time, the opportunity had finally come back to her. "Luke," Lisette exclaimed that evening, her face glowing with excitement as she shared the news. "I've been granted a scholarship. I can finally go back to university and finish my degree." Luke beamed at her, pride evident in his eyes. "That's amazing, Lisette. I knew you had something great coming your way. You've worked so hard, and you deserve this. I'm so proud of you," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. With Luke's unwavering support, Lisette began preparing for her return to university. She meticulously planned her schedule, balancing her classes with her responsibilities at the shop. Luke, ever supportive, offered to take on more hours at the business so she could focus on her studies. The first few weeks of classes were challenging. Juggling academic work with managing the shop was no easy task, but for Lisette, the challenges were invigorating. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, her mind absorbing the knowledge and experiences around her. Surrounded by young students and professors who sparked her curiosity, Lisette's confidence grew with each passing day. She was rediscovering a part of herself that had long been dormant. One afternoon, After a particularly intense finance class, Lisette stopped by the campus cafe to review her notes. As she sat down, she noticed an older woman sitting by herself with a book in hand. There was something about her that seemed familiar, a memory tugging at the edge of Lisette's mind. "Excuse me," Lisette said, approaching the woman. "Are you Professor Herschel?" The woman looked up and smiled warmly. "Yes, I am. Do we know each other?" Lisette's heart swelled with gratitude. "I'm Lisette. You were my professor years ago before I had to leave. I've always wanted to thank you for everything you did for me." Recognition lit up Professor Herschel's face, and her smile deepened. "Ah, Lisette. It's wonderful to see you again. I'm so glad my teachings made a difference. How have you been?" Sitting down with her former professor, Lisette briefly shared the ups and downs of her journey, her marriage, the struggles she faced, the shop she had opened, and her return to university. Professor Herschel listened intently, nodding with approval. "You are an example of resilience and strength," Lisette the professor said, her words filled with admiration. "I'm so proud of you. It takes a lot of courage to pursue your dreams after everything you've been through." Those words resonated deeply with Lisette. Hearing them from someone she respected only reinforced her determination to continue on this path. She left the cafe that day feeling even more motivated to move forward, knowing she had not only the support of Luke but also the recognition of those who had believed in her all along. As the months passed, Lisette found a new rhythm in her life. She managed to balance her studies with her responsibilities at the shop, often applying what she learned in class to the business. Luke was her constant source of encouragement, always there to remind her of her strength and potential. His love and unwavering belief in her helped her navigate the inevitable challenges that arose. One evening, after a particularly long day of studying and working, Lisette and Luke sat together in their small private library, sipping tea and enjoying the quiet. "Do you realize how far we've come?" Luke asked, his voice soft with admiration as he looked at her. Lisette smiled, squeezing his hand. "Yes. And it's all because of our hard work, our love, and our commitment to each other. I've never felt more fulfilled or happier than I do now." Luke's eyes softened as he leaned in closer. "And this is just the beginning, Lisette. We've built something beautiful together, and I know we can accomplish anything we set our minds to." Lisette felt a surge of warmth in her chest. Luke had been her partner in every sense of the word, sharing in her triumphs and helping her through her challenges. Together, they created a life filled with love, purpose, and endless possibilities. As they sat there, surrounded by books and memories of their shared journey, Lisette knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together stronger and more united than ever before. Lisette smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace and fulfillment as the evening's magic unfolded. She knew her future was full of endless possibilities, and with Luke by her side, she felt ready to seize every opportunity. Together, they were an unstoppable force, driven by love, determination, and the unshakable belief that anything was possible as long as they faced life hand in hand. As the semester progressed, Lisette continued to thrive in her studies. Her professors recognized her dedication, often praising her for her sharp insights and thoughtful contributions. Her classmates looked up to her, inspired by her resilience and the grace with which she juggled her academic life, her business, and her journey. Lisette, more confident and empowered than ever, felt like she had truly stepped into the woman she was always meant to be. Meanwhile, the coffee and letters shop blossomed into a cherished local gem, drawing in a devoted clientele who adored its welcoming atmosphere and the carefully chosen selection of books. Lisette and Luke had become beloved figures in the community, their kindness and warmth radiating through every interaction. The shop was more than just a business, it was a place of connection, where people felt seen and valued. Lisette had found her purpose. She had overcome adversity, rediscovered her dreams, and built a life filled with love, creativity, and meaning. With Luke's unwavering support and her resilient spirit guiding her, she knew she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. She felt certain that together, they could accomplish anything. One evening, as the sun set in a sky painted with hues of orange and pink, Lisette and Luke closed the doors of Coffee and Letters after another successful day. The shop was thriving, the culmination of their shared passion and hard work. But tonight was different. There was something special in the air. As they locked up, Luke turned to her with a playful smile, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "Lisette, would you like to go for a walk?" Lisette, intrigued by the sparkle in his gaze, returned his smile and nodded. "I'd love to." They strolled through the quiet streets, hand in hand, the cool night breeze wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Luke led her to a small, familiar park not far from the shop, a place they often visited after long days, where the quiet serenity helped them unwind. "It's beautiful here," Lizette said softly, gazing up at the stars twinkling through the branches of the towering oak trees. "Yes, it is," Luke replied, but his eyes never left her. They stopped beneath an old oak tree, one that had stood for generations, weathering the changing seasons and witnessing countless stories unfold beneath its branches. Luke turned to face her, and there was something different in his expression and intensity, a quiet determination mixed with a touch of nervousness. "Lizette," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "From the moment we reconnected, I knew something was different. Our friendship grew into something deeper, something more meaningful than I ever could have imagined. We've been through so much together, overcome challenges, and built something beautiful. Every single day with you has been a gift, and I can't imagine my life without you." Lizette's heart began to race. She could feel the emotion thickening in the air, the anticipation swelling between them. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Luke pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt before her, his eyes never leaving hers. In the soft glow of the park's dim lights, Luke opened the box, revealing a stunning ring that glimmered like a promise beneath the stars. "Lizette," Luke said, his voice filled with love and sincerity, "I love you more than I can ever express in words. You are my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Lizette's eyes as she looked down at the man she loved, the man who had been her rock, her support, and her constant source of joy. In that moment, every hardship, every obstacle she had faced seemed worth it, because it had all led her here, to this moment of pure happiness. Without hesitation, Lizette nodded, her voice trembling with emotion as she responded, "Yes, Luke. Yes, I will marry you." Luke stood, his face beaming with joy, and gently slid the ring onto her finger. They embraced, and as they shared a kiss under the ancient oak tree, it felt like the world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them, wrapped in love and the promise of a future filled with endless possibilities. In that magical moment, Lizette knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, adventure, and the knowledge that, together, they could face anything. Their love story was just beginning, and the best was yet to come. Lizette's heart skipped a beat at Dash's ominous words, but she remained composed, her mind racing as she tried to read his intentions. She had come too far, built a life too beautiful to let his bitterness undo her progress. She stood tall, her voice calm yet firm. "Dash, the past is behind us. I've found happiness, and I hope you do too. But you can't cling to the past forever. You need to move on." Dash's smile flickered, his expression hardening. "Move on," he echoed, his voice laced with frustration. "It's easy for you to say, Lizette. You've got everything, a thriving business, a perfect partner. But what about me? Therapy hasn't helped. All it's done is show me how much I've lost because of you." Lizette felt a surge of anger at his accusation, but quickly calmed herself. "You lost things because of your own choices, Dash. You made those decisions, not me. I rebuilt my life from the ground up after everything fell apart, and you can too. But it's up to you to take that step, not blame others." Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to Dash's growing hostility. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing, and Lizette's heart began to pound in her chest. She glanced toward the door, hoping Luke would return soon, but she didn't let her fear show. She had faced bigger challenges than this and emerged stronger. "You always were the one who made things difficult, weren't you?" Dash muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe things wouldn't have gone this way if you'd just stayed quiet, accepted things. But no, you had to fight back, had to stand up for yourself." Lizette took a deep breath, her mind flashing back to those years when she had indeed stayed quiet, letting Dash control her life. She had broken free of that, and she wasn't about to let him drag her back into that darkness. "I fought back because I knew I deserved better, Dash, and I'm not afraid to stand up to you now." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Dash's expression twisted, the smile returning, but this time more sinister. "Well, maybe it's time someone stood up to you, Lizette. Maybe it's time you felt what I've been feeling." The air in the room grew thick with tension, and Lizette felt her pulse quicken. She could sense the danger lurking behind his words. Just as she was about to respond, the bell above the door chimed, and Luke entered, carrying a stack of books for the store. The tension in the room was palpable, and Luke immediately sensed something was wrong. "Lizette, everything okay here?" Luke asked, his eyes narrowing as he glanced between her and Dash. Lizette nodded, grateful for his presence but keeping her voice steady. "Yes, Luke." Dash was just leaving. Dash's eyes flickered with something darker as he looked at Luke, but he didn't say anything more. Instead, he turned toward the door, but not before throwing one last look over his shoulder at Lizette. "This isn't over, Lizette. Not by a long shot." With that, he left the shop, the door closing softly behind him, leaving an eerie silence in his wake. Luke quickly crossed the room to Lizette, concern etched across his face. "What did he say to you?" Lizette exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the lingering unease. "He's still stuck in the past, Luke. He's angry, and I think he feels like he's lost everything. I'm worried he might do something reckless." Luke's jaw tightened, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "We'll keep an eye on him. He's not going to hurt you, Lizette. I promise. I promise." But even as they embraced, Lizette couldn't shake the feeling that Dash wasn't finished, that his bitterness had grown into something dangerous. She knew they needed to stay vigilant. Dash had crossed a line, and the unsettling encounter was a reminder that even after moving on, the ghosts of the past could still find a way to haunt you. That night, as they prepared for bed, Lizette lay in Luke's arms, her mind restless. She reflected on how far she had come, how she had rebuilt her life, found true love, and created a future filled with hope. Yet the shadows of her past, embodied in Dash's resentment, still lingered at the edges. She knew she couldn't control what Dash might do next, but she also knew she wasn't the same woman who had once feared him. As she drifted off to sleep, Lizette reminded herself of her strength. Whatever came next, she and Luke would face it together, and no matter how dark the storm was, they would emerge on the other side, stronger than before. Lizette stood there, heart racing, as Dash's outburst hung in the air. The tension among the guests was palpable, their once joyous expressions now replaced with shock and confusion. But amidst the chaos, Lizette's mind was clear. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let this moment be tarnished by the ghosts of the past. Luke, calm and unwavering, stood protectively in front of her, his voice steady as he addressed Dash. "This is our day, Dash. Whatever unresolved feelings you have, this is not the time or place to air them. I'm asking you, for the sake of everyone here, to leave." But Dash wasn't backing down. His face twisted with anger, and he took another step forward, glaring at Lizette. "You think you can just erase the past? You left me, Lizette. You made me feel worthless, and now you're trying to walk away from it all like it never happened." Lizette felt her heart pounding, but something inside her steadied. She had spent too many years shrinking under Dash's shadow, allowing his bitterness to define her. Not anymore. She gently placed her hand on Luke's arm, signaling for him to step aside. She needed to face Dash herself on her terms. With strength she didn't realize she possessed, Lizette stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "Dash, I understand your pain. I know you're hurting, but our past, everything that happened between us, it's over. We both made mistakes, but I've worked hard to move forward, to find peace. This wedding, this moment, isn't about erasing the past. It's about embracing a future built on love and healing. You need to do the same." For a brief moment, Dash seemed to falter, the resentment in his eyes flickering with something like doubt, but it was fleeting. His fists clenched at his sides and he shook his head. "You don't get it, do you? I don't care about your peace. I've lost everything because of you." Lizette's heart broke at the words. She had once loved Dash, despite the pain they had caused each other. But now she saw him for what he had become, a man trapped in his anger, unable to move forward. "I'm sorry for your pain, Dash," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I won't let you destroy what I've worked so hard to build. Not today." As Lizette spoke, the crowd remained silent, their eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Luke stood by her side, his presence a constant source of strength. And then something shifted. Dash's defiant expression softened, and for the first time he looked lost. His shoulders slumped, and the fire in his eyes dimmed. "You don't understand. I have nothing left," he whispered, his voice broken. Lizette felt a wave of compassion surge through her. She knew that Dash's pain was real, but she also knew that she couldn't save him. "You can still find something, Dash, but not here. Not like this." There was a long pause before Dash finally sighed, defeated. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing through the garden, leaving behind only a ripple of uncertainty among the guests. As he left, the weight of the moment lifted, and a quiet calm returned to the garden. Lisette turned to Luke, her heart full of gratitude for his unwavering support. Their eyes met, and at that moment, everything fell back into place. This was their day, and nothing, not even Dash's attempt to disrupt it, could take that away. Luke smiled at her, his eyes filled with love. "You handled that perfectly." Lisette smiled back, a mixture of relief and pride swelling in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you." The officiant, who had watched the scene unfold with the same shock as everyone else, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Shall we continue?" A soft murmur of agreement spread through the crowd, and the ceremony resumed. As Lisette and Luke exchanged their vows under the warm sunlight, the moment felt even more meaningful, because it wasn't just a celebration of love, but of resilience, strength, and the unwavering belief that they could face anything together. When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, a cheer erupted from the guests, and the atmosphere was filled with joy once again. Lisette and Luke shared a kiss, sealing their union not just as partners, but as two people who had overcome every obstacle thrown their way. Later that evening, as they stood on the terrace, watching the stars twinkle above them, Lisette leaned into Luke's arms, feeling at peace. "We made it," she whispered. "Ain." Luke kissed her gently on the forehead. "We did, and whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Lisette gazed out at the night sky, her heart full of love and hope. She knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but with Luke by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. Together, they were stronger than any storm, and their future was bright and filled with endless possibilities. Lisette and Luke's wedding was far more than just a celebration. It was a profound symbol of love's ability to overcome adversity, a testament to the strength of their bond and the resilience of their spirits. The air was thick with emotion as they exchanged vows, promising not just to stand by each other, but to walk through life hand in hand. No matter what challenges or triumphs awaited them, it wasn't just the couple that felt the magnitude of the moment. Every guest who had witnessed their journey was touched deeply, as if they were all a part of this new beginning. Their wedding marked a fresh chapter, not only for Lisette and Luke, but for everyone who had supported and loved them along the way. After the wedding, Lisette and Luke wasted no time in diving headfirst into the next phase of their lives. Their hearts were filled with renewed energy, and their minds buzzed with ideas and plans for the future. Life, with all its inevitable ups and downs, awaited them, but they were more than ready to face it together, side by side, as they had always done. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a deep, unshakable faith that no matter what life threw their way, their love would be their greatest strength. They were determined to face every challenge and savor every joy with the same unwavering commitment they had pledged to each other on their wedding day. People didn't just come to their cafes for a cup of coffee or a book. They came for the warmth, the connection, and the sense of belonging that Lisette and Luke had worked so hard to create. As the business expanded into new cities, each store carried with it the same heart and soul that had made the original location a success. Every new cafe was a unique gem, with its personality and charm, yet all were tied together by the common thread of the couple's vision, a space where people could come together to share ideas, experiences, and most importantly, a sense of community. Lisette, now armed with her hard-earned degree in business administration, was more confident than ever as she stepped into a more strategic leadership role within their growing empire. Her business acumen, combined with her deep love for books and coffee, made her a formidable leader, respected by her team and admired by the community. Her vision was not just about expanding the business, it was about creating spaces that felt like home, where creativity and conversation could flourish. Every decision she made, every new venture she embarked on, was infused with her passion and heart. Her creativity flowed through every aspect of the business, from the layout of the cafes to the selection of books. And it was this personal touch that made each store feel so special. Luke, as always, was her rock. His calm, steady presence balanced Lisette's creative energy perfectly. He handled the day-to-day operations and the financial aspects of the business with the same care and dedication that Lisette brought to her role. Together, they were an unstoppable team, a perfect partnership built on mutual respect, admiration, and love. Where Lisette saw potential and possibility, Luke ensured that those dreams were brought to life with precision and practicality. Their complementary strengths made them not only successful in business but also life. They supported each other through every challenge, celebrated every success, and never lost sight of the deep love that had brought them together in the first place. As their business continued to thrive, Lisette and Luke felt the pull toward a new adventure, the adventure of starting a family. A year after their wedding, they decided that the time was right to welcome a new life into their world. When Lisette discovered she was pregnant, the news filled their lives with an almost overwhelming joy. The anticipation of becoming parents brought a new kind of excitement into their lives, and they threw themselves into preparing for the arrival of their child with the same enthusiasm they brought to everything they did. They lovingly transformed a room in their home into a nursery, carefully selecting every detail with thoughts of the future they were about to build as a family. The moment their son Matthew was born was nothing short of life-changing. His arrival brought a depth of love and fulfillment into Lisette and Luke's lives that they hadn't known was possible. The joy of parenthood with all its tender, beautiful moments became the center of their world. They cherished every smile, every coo, every little milestone, from Matthew's first giggles to his first tentative steps. The little things, watching him sleep, hearing his laughter, seeing the wonder in his eyes, became their greatest treasures. Parenthood wasn't always easy, but for Lisette and Luke, it was the most rewarding journey they had ever embarked on. As their family grew, so did their love, not only for each other but for the life they were building together. Every challenge they faced, whether in business or parenting, only strengthened the bond between them. They had always been a team, and now, with Matthew in their lives, they felt even more united. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future bright with possibility. They knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together, with the same determination and love that had carried them through every step of their journey so far. Meanwhile, Dash's story took a different path. His actions at Lisette and Luke's wedding had been a turning point not just for them, but for him as well. It was a moment that forced him to confront the darkness inside himself, the anger and pain that had been driving him for so long. For Dash, the wedding incident was his rock bottom, but it was also the catalyst for a deep and necessary change. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his need for revenge had been a reflection of his inner turmoil, a desperate attempt to fill the void left by his despair. With a renewed sense of purpose, Dash threw himself into therapy, determined to break free from the cycle of anger and bitterness that had consumed him for so long. It wasn't an easy road. He faced setbacks, moments of doubt, and the pain of confronting his demons. But with each session, with each small step forward, he began to find a new perspective on his life. Slowly but surely, Dash started to rebuild his relationships, reconnecting with friends and family who had always been there, waiting for him to let them in. They became his support system, offering him the love and encouragement he needed to stay on the path toward healing. As the months passed, Dash's hard work began to pay off. He wasn't the same person he had been before. He was stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever to make amends for his past mistakes. He found solace in the small victories, in the gradual but steady progress he was making. It wasn't just about finding peace with Lisette and Luke. Though that was part of it, it was about finding peace within himself. Dash came to understand that true redemption wasn't about seeking forgiveness from others, but about forgiving himself and moving forward with a heart that was open to change. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. By the time Lisette and Luke welcomed Matthew into their lives, Dash had made significant strides in his journey. Though his path had been a difficult one, it had also been transformative. He had learned that healing wasn't a destination, it was a continuous process, one that required patience, perseverance, and above all, self-compassion. And as he stood on the sidelines, watching Lisette and Luke build their beautiful life together, Dash felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope for his future, hope for the possibility of a better, brighter tomorrow. One day, Dash made a life-altering decision to leave behind the familiar streets of his hometown and the painful memories that had lingered there for far too long. He yearned for a clean slate, a place where he could truly begin anew, far from the ghosts of his past. With a suitcase in hand and hope in his heart, he set out for a new city, ready to reclaim his life. There, amid the unfamiliar faces and bustling streets, Dash discovered a job that reignited a passion within him, a career that filled him with purpose and pride. Slowly, he began to rebuild, crafting a life anchored in honesty, respect, and newfound self-worth. Though the past could never be undone, he had finally come to terms with it. Dash learned to embrace his history, not as a burden but as a testament to his strength, and he faced the future with a heart full of hope. Lisette often reflected on the struggles and challenges she had faced over the years, the moments of doubt, the hardships that seemed insurmountable, but instead of dwelling on them, she saw those trials as stepping stones, each one leading her to the rich, full life she now enjoyed. One bright afternoon, as she and Luke strolled hand in hand through the park, with little Matthew toddling beside them, Luke paused and gazed at her, a soft smile touching his lips. "Do you ever stop and think about everything we've accomplished together?" he asked, his voice filled with pride and love as he held Matthew's tiny hand, guiding him as he took his first wobbly steps. Lizette's heart swelled with emotion, and she smiled back at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I do," she replied softly, her voice laced with joy. "And I wouldn't change a single thing about our journey. Every challenge, every hardship, it's all brought us here, to this moment of love and happiness." Luke gently kissed her, a gesture of the deep love that had grown between them over the years. Together they watched with wonder as their son explored the world with wide-eyed curiosity, his tiny feet venturing forward with excitement and innocence. In that moment, they both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, just as they always had. Life, with all its unpredictable twists and turns, would undoubtedly bring more challenges, but they were ready. Their love was a fortress, a foundation that had been tested and strengthened by time and adversity. And with that love as their guide, they knew they could handle anything life threw their way. Lizette and Luke had found in each other not just life partners, but soulmates, people who truly understood, supported, and inspired one another to grow and become better each day. Their bond was the kind that deepened with time, weathering storms and celebrating sunshine in equal measure. And as they stood there in the park, hand in hand, watching Matthew take his first steps into the world, they felt an overwhelming sense of pride and contentment. Life was a continuous journey, one that would be filled with moments of profound joy and inevitable trials. But they had learned to navigate it together, leaning on each other when times were tough and celebrating together when times were good. With the future stretching out before them like an endless horizon of possibilities, Lizette and Luke felt a renewed sense of purpose and excitement for what lay ahead. They had built a life of love, hope, and success. And though they didn't know exactly what the future would bring, they knew one thing for certain: they would always have each other. Together, they would face every challenge, celebrate every victory, and share every moment, both the beautiful and the difficult. And so, with hearts full of love and hands firmly clasped, Lizette and Luke moved forward into the unknown, ready to build an even brighter future. Their journey was far from over, but as long as they had each other, they knew they could conquer anything life had to offer. As we reflect on Lizette, Luke, and Dash's journeys, their stories remind us of the power of perseverance, love, and redemption. What have you learned from their experiences? Is there one lesson that resonates with you the most? We invite you to take a moment to comment below, sharing one thing you've learned from their story and how you plan to bring it into practice in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories and life lessons. Thank you for watching.